Her limbs had been shattered, both legs pulverized. She had been savagely beaten senseless, almost dead. The alien's broken body had been carelessly discarded in the dumpster. At least, until human diplomat Kyle Taylor found her clinging to the edge of existence. Kyle was grimly fascinated by the contrast. High-tech anti-grav vehicles hummed through the sterile streets, past towering metal and glass spires. But he had just found an alien left for dead in a garbage heap, with tech millennia beyond anything on Earth. Some welcome for the first human to ever step foot on an alien planet. The human envoy had come alone to the Lurian homeworld of Luria Prime, tasked with the monumentally important mission of establishing humanity's first diplomatic ties with an extraterrestrial intelligence. The fate of trillions rested on his shoulders. If Kyle could secure an alliance with the reptilian Lurians, it would propel humanity ahead centuries in technology and ensure their survival in a dangerous galaxy. He already felt out of his depth after the icy reception from Izar, the high-ranking member of the Lurian High Council, sent to greet him. The imposing 7-foot-tall reptile made his disdain clear, his forked tongue flicking dismissively as he looked down on the primitive, emotionally unstable human with piercing yellow eyes. Kyle couldn't shake the uneasy feeling as he was escorted through the lifeless Lurian capital city of Zarthak. No plants, no birds, not even a blade of grass grew here. The Lurians had long ago wiped out all other life on their planet in the name of efficiency. Cities of nothing but glass, metal, and scales. But none of that mattered now. Kyle scooped up the broken, bloodied body of the female alien and carried her in his arms, not knowing if she would live or die, not knowing her story or the cruelty she had faced. But the human resolved to get her help and unravel the disturbing mystery, even if it upended his diplomatic mission before it began. He would show the Lurians what it meant to be human. Kyle's heart raced as he made his way through the maze-like corridors of the Lurian medical facility, Asher's broken body cradled in his arms. The sleek metal walls were a blur as he rushed past startled Lurian medics and patients, ignoring their hisses of confusion and outrage. "I need help now," Kyle shouted, his voice echoing through the sterile halls. He burst into the main treatment area, where a group of Lurian doctors stood around a holographic display, their reptilian features etched with disdain as they turned to face the intruder. "What is the meaning of this?" the lead doctor demanded, his forked tongue flicking out in irritation. "You cannot just barge in here with—" The doctor's words died in his throat as he saw the battered Lurian female in Kyle's arms. Asher's once vibrant green scales were now mottled with dark bruises and gashes, her leg twisted at a sickening angle. "She needs immediate medical attention," Kyle said firmly, meeting the doctor's gaze without flinching. "I found her in an alley, attacked by extremists. As a representative of Earth and a diplomat to your people, I insist that you treat her." The Lurian medical staff exchanged uneasy glances, clearly torn between their duty as healers and their societal prejudices. After a tense moment, the lead doctor nodded curtly. "Very well," he said, motioning for his colleagues to prepare a treatment table. "But do not think this means we approve of your interference in our affairs, human." As Asher was carefully transferred to the table and swarmed by Lurian medics, Kyle stepped back, his mind reeling from the events of the past few hours. He watched as the doctors worked to stabilize Asher's condition, their clawed hands moving with practiced precision over her wounds. Hours later, as Asher rested in a recovery pod, her injuries mended by advanced Lurian medical technology, Kyle sat by her side, deep in thought. The female Lurian stirred, her eyes fluttering open to meet Kyle's concerned gaze. "Thank you," Asher whispered, her voice weak but filled with gratitude. "You saved my life." Kyle leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "Asher, what happened to you? Who did this?" Asher closed her eyes, a shudder running through her body. "There are those among my people who fear change, who cling to our old ways like a hatchling to its mother. They see your arrival as a threat to our society, a corruption of our purity." She paused, her expression hardening with determination. But there are also those like me who believe that the Lurians have become stagnant, that we need new ideas and perspectives to grow. Contact with your species could be the catalyst we need. Kyle listened intently, his mind racing with the implications of Asher's words. He knew that his mission to establish diplomatic ties with the Lurians was critical, but he had not anticipated the deep divisions within their society. As he sat by Asher's side, Kyle began to formulate a plan. He would need to navigate the treacherous waters of Lurian politics carefully to find allies among those who shared Asher's vision of a more open and progressive society. The success of his mission, and perhaps the fate of both their species, could depend on it. Steeling himself for the critical meeting that could make or break his mission, Kyle strode into the imposing chamber of the Lurian High Council. The reptilian leaders were already seated at a long, curved table, their yellow eyes fixed on the human as he approached. Izar, the council member who had greeted Kyle upon his arrival, sat at the center, his expression unreadable. "Esteemed members of the Lurian High Council," Kyle began, his voice steady and diplomatic, "I come before you today to discuss the immense potential for cooperation and mutual growth between our two species." Izar's forked tongue flicked out, tasting the air. "And what precisely do you believe we stand to gain from associating with your kind? Your species has a history of conflict and emotional instability." Several council members nodded in agreement, their scales rustling. Kyle took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "While it is true that humanity has faced its share of challenges, we have also demonstrated a remarkable capacity for innovation, resilience, and compassion. By working together, we can learn from one another, sharing knowledge and resources to overcome the obstacles that threaten us both." As Kyle continued to make his case, highlighting the benefits of cultural exchange and scientific collaboration, he could see some of the council members beginning to waver. Just as the debate was reaching a critical point, Kyle's wrist communicator vibrated urgently. Glancing down, he saw a message from the medical facility where Asher was being treated. "Emergency. Extremists infiltrated facility, attempting to assassinate patient. Immediate assistance required." Kyle's heart raced as he looked up at the council, his expression grim. "Please excuse me, councillors. I have just received an urgent message requiring my immediate attention. I must leave at once." Without waiting for a response, Kyle turned and sprinted from the chamber, ignoring the shocked hisses of the Lurian leaders. As he raced through the corridors, he activated his communicator, contacting the Lurian security forces stationed nearby. "This is Kyle Taylor, requesting immediate backup at the medical facility. We have a hostage situation involving extremists. Meet me there as soon as possible." Within minutes, Kyle arrived at the facility, a small team of heavily armed Lurian security personnel at his side. The once sterile halls were now filled with the sounds of shouting and the acrid scent of smoke. Rounding a corner, Kyle and the security team found themselves face to face with a group of extremists, their scales marked with the symbols of their radical faction. They held Asher and several medical staff at gunpoint, their clawed fingers tightening on the triggers of their energy weapons. "Release the hostages and surrender peacefully," Kyle called out, his voice calm but firm. "There is no need for further violence." The extremists snarled, their eyes narrowing. "The human speaks of peace, yet his very presence here is an act of war against our way of life," the leader spat. "We will not allow our society to be tainted by outsiders." As the standoff intensified, Kyle drew upon his diplomatic training and his growing understanding of Lurian culture. He began to negotiate with the extremists, appealing to their sense of honor and the shared values that united all Lurians, regardless of their political beliefs. Minutes turned into hours as Kyle worked tirelessly to find common ground, his words carefully chosen to bridge the gap between the hostage-takers and their captives. Finally, as tensions reached a breaking point, the extremists began to waver. Seizing the opportunity, Kyle made one final impassioned plea. "Asher and her colleagues have dedicated their lives to healing and preserving life. just as your ancestors did. By harming them, you betray the very principles that define your society. Release them, and let us work together to find a path forward for all Lurians." Slowly, the extremists lowered their weapons, their resolve crumbling in the face of Kyle's words. The hostages were released, and the security team moved in to apprehend the radicals. In the aftermath of the crisis, Asha and the medical staff surrounded Kyle, their gratitude evident in their expressions. "You saved us," Asha said softly, her eyes shining with tears. "You risked your own life to protect ours, even after all you had already done for me." Kyle smiled, his exhaustion tempered by a sense of relief and accomplishment. "It's what any decent person would have done," he replied humbly. Unbeknownst to Kyle and the others, the Lurian High Council had been monitoring the situation through live video feeds. As they watched the human diplomat's bravery and compassion in action, they began to reconsider their initial misgivings about the potential for human-Lurian cooperation. In the council chamber, Izar turned to his fellow leaders, his expression thoughtful. "Perhaps we have misjudged this human, and his species as a whole," he mused. "If one individual can display such courage and understanding in the face of adversity, imagine what our two peoples could achieve together." The other council members murmured in agreement, their doubts and fears slowly giving way to a newfound sense of possibility. The path ahead would be long and challenging, but with the leadership of individuals like Kyle and Asha, the future of human-Lurian relations seemed brighter than ever before. In the days following the harrowing hostage incident, Kyle and Asha grew closer, their shared experience forging a bond of trust and understanding. As Asha recovered from her injuries, she spent long hours with Kyle, sharing her knowledge of Lurian culture, history, and politics. Kyle listened intently, absorbing every detail, knowing that this information would be crucial in his ongoing diplomatic efforts. One evening, as they sat together in Asha's living quarters, Kyle's wrist communicator chimed with an incoming message. His eyes widened as he read the encrypted communique, a sense of disbelief and anger washing over him. "What is it?" Asha asked, noticing the change in Kyle's demeanor. Kyle looked up, his jaw clenched. According to this intelligence report, the Lurians have been conducting a secret military project using stolen human scientific data to develop advanced weapons technology. Asha's scales rippled with shock. "That can't be true. The High Council would never approve of such a thing." "I need to confront Izar about this immediately," Kyle said, standing abruptly. "If this is true, it could jeopardize everything we've worked for." The next morning, Kyle strode into Izar's office, his expression grim. The Lurian leader looked up from his holographic display, his yellow eyes narrowing. "Ambassador Taylor, to what do I owe this unexpected visit?" Kyle slammed his hand down on Izar's desk, causing the holographic images to flicker. "I know about the secret military project, Izar. The one where you've been stealing human scientific data to develop weapons." Izar's scales flared defensively. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me," Kyle snapped. "I have proof. You've been engaging in espionage, violating the trust between our species." For a long moment, Izar held Kyle's gaze, his forked tongue flicking out to taste the air. Finally he sighed, his shoulders slumping. "Yes, it's true," he admitted. "But you must understand, Ambassador, we live in an uncertain galaxy. The project was necessary to ensure our security, to protect our way of life." Kyle shook his head. "No, Izar, this isn't the way. If we're going to build a lasting partnership between our species, we need transparency and cooperation, not secrecy and mistrust." He leaned forward, his voice softening. "I have a proposal, a joint human-Lurian scientific initiative, where we share knowledge and resources in areas like energy production, space exploration, and medical research. It would foster mutual trust and understanding, and help bridge the gap between our civilizations." Izar considered Kyle's words, his clawed fingers drumming on the desk. "The High Council will need to discuss this proposal, but perhaps you're right, Ambassador. Perhaps it's time for a new approach." Over the next several weeks, Kyle worked tirelessly to secure the High Council's support for the joint initiative. Asha proved to be an invaluable ally, using her connections and influence to sway key council members. Finally, after much deliberation, the council agreed to Kyle's proposal, recognizing the potential benefits for both species. As the initiative began to take shape, Kyle and Asha found themselves working side by side, overseeing its implementation. But even as they made progress, they faced challenges at every turn. Cultural differences and centuries of mistrust threatened to undermine their efforts, requiring constant diplomacy and compromise. And then there were the extremists, led by a charismatic Lurian named Zoran. They viewed the joint initiative as a betrayal of Lurian values, a surrender to human influence. As Kyle and Asha worked to bring their peoples together, Zoran and his followers plotted to tear them apart. It started with small acts of sabotage, a damaged power conduit here, a corrupted data file there. But soon the attacks escalated. Human and Lurian scientists were targeted, their labs vandalized, their research destroyed. Kyle and Asha found themselves racing against time to keep the initiative alive, even as Zoran's influence grew. They knew that if they failed, the fragile peace between their species would shatter, plunging them into a conflict that could devastate both worlds. Late one night, as Kyle pored over security reports in his quarters, his communicator chimed with an urgent message from Asha. "Kyle, come quickly," she said, her voice tense with fear. "There's been another attack. Zoran has taken hostages at the Central Research Facility. He's threatening to kill them unless we shut down the initiative." Kyle cursed under his breath as he rushed out the door, his heart pounding. He knew that the fate of the initiative, and perhaps the future of human-Lurian relations, now hung in the balance. Kyle's heart raced as he and Asha rushed through the crowded corridors of the conference center, the sound of their footsteps drowned out by the frenzied chatter of human and Lurian scientists alike. They had been working around the clock to keep the joint initiative on track, despite the escalating attacks from Zoran's extremist faction. As they entered the main auditorium, Kyle couldn't shake the feeling of unease that crept up his spine. He scanned the room, taking in the sea of unfamiliar faces, both human and reptilian. Asha leaned in close, her voice low and urgent. "We need to be on high alert," she whispered, her eyes darting around the room. "Zoran's followers could be anywhere." Kyle nodded, his hand instinctively reaching for the concealed blaster at his hip. He had never been one for violence, but the recent attacks had forced him to take precautions. The meeting began, with scientists from both sides presenting their latest findings and proposals for collaboration. Kyle and Asha listened intently, taking notes and exchanging glances as they tried to gauge the room's reaction. Suddenly, a deafening blast shook the auditorium, sending chunks of metal and debris flying in all directions. Kyle felt the ground give way beneath his feet, and he reached out blindly for Asha as they tumbled into darkness. When he came to, Kyle found himself trapped beneath a twisted pile of rubble, his body aching from the impact. He coughed, choking on the thick dust that filled the air. "Asha!" he called out, his voice hoarse and strained. A faint groan answered him from somewhere nearby, and Kyle's heart leapt into his throat. He began to dig frantically through the debris, ignoring the sharp pain that shot through his limbs with every movement. Finally he found her, her green scales covered in a thick layer of dust and grime. Asha's eyes fluttered open, and she let out a weak cry of pain. Kyle's stomach lurched as he saw the deep gash across her abdomen, oozing dark blood. "Hold on," he whispered, tearing off a strip of fabric from his shirt and pressing it against the wound. "I've got you." Asha's breathing was shallow and rapid, her eyes glazed with pain. Kyle knew that she needed medical attention, and fast, but with the building still threatening to collapse around them, he couldn't risk moving her. Drawing on his limited medical training, Kyle searched through the rubble for anything he could use to stabilize Asha's condition. He found a few scattered medical supplies, including a half-empty pack of antiseptic wipes and a roll of adhesive tape. Working quickly, he cleaned and dressed the wound as best he could, his hands shaking with adrenaline. Asha drifted in and out of consciousness, her scales growing paler by the minute. "Stay with me," Kyle pleaded, cradling her head in his lap. "Help is on the way, just hold on a little longer." Hours passed, and Kyle refused to leave Asher's side, even as the walls around them groaned and shifted with each passing minute. He talked to her constantly, telling her stories of his childhood on Earth, of the wonders he had seen during his travels among the stars. Finally, the sound of voices and the clank of metal on metal reached his ears. The rescue teams had arrived, and they were working to clear the debris. When they were pulled from the wreckage, Kyle's relief was short-lived. The attack had been devastating, claiming the lives of several key members of the joint initiative, including Izar, who had come to support the project despite his initial reservations. In the wake of the tragedy, the Lurian High Council made the difficult decision to suspend the joint initiative indefinitely, citing the need to focus on internal security and stability. Kyle was devastated. He had poured his heart and soul into the project, and now it lay in ruins along with so many of his hopes and dreams. As he prepared to return to Earth, Kyle visited Asher one last time in the medical facility. She was recovering slowly, her wounds healing thanks to the advanced Lurian medical technology. Asher reached out and took Kyle's hand, her grip weak but steady. "I have something for you," she said softly, pressing a small data chip into his palm. "What is it?" Kyle asked, turning the chip over in his fingers. "Information," Asher replied, her eyes hard with determination. "About Zoran and his network. Use it to bring them to justice, to make sure that their crimes don't go unpunished." Kyle nodded, tucking the chip into his pocket. "I will," he promised. "I won't let their sacrifices be in vain." Back on Earth, Kyle presented the information to his superiors, who recognized the significance of the data. They pledged to support him in his ongoing efforts to build bridges between humans and Lurians, to honor the memory of those who had lost their lives in the pursuit of peace. As Kyle boarded the ship that would take him back to Luria Prime, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. He knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, that there would be many more challenges to face and obstacles to overcome. But he also knew that he would not rest until he had fulfilled his mission, until he had brought Zoran and his followers to justice and forged a lasting bond between his people and the Lurians. He owed it to Izar, to the scientists who had perished in the attack, and to Asher, who had risked everything to help him. He owed it to himself, and to the future he hoped to build. As the ship lifted off, Kyle stared out the window at the receding Earth, his jaw set with determination. He would not fail, not this time. He would see this through to the end, no matter the cost. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.